The world has taught you that silence means surrender, that if you're not making noise, then you don't matter, that quietness is the same as emptiness. They mistake your stillness for weakness, your observation for fear, your patience for passivity. But here's what they don't understand. The most dangerous forces in nature don't announce themselves with thunder and spectacle. They move beneath the surface. They gather power in the shadows. They wait for the perfect moment to strike. And by the time anyone realizes what's happening, the landscape has already been reshaped forever. You spent years being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated by people who confuse volume with value, who thought that whoever speaks loudest must be speaking truth, who gave stages and applause to performers while you sat in the corner processing, thinking, building something they couldn't see. The exhaustion isn't just from being invisible. It's from wondering if maybe they're right, if maybe your quietness really is weakness, if maybe you should be louder, bolder, more demanding of attention just to prove you exist. You know what it feels like to have an answer but stay silent because you've learned that speaking up costs more than it's worth. You've watched people with half your insight and twice your confidence take credit, take opportunities, take the room while you fade into the background. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being in a crowded room and knowing that no one really sees you, not because you're hiding, but because they've decided you're not worth noticing. You've sat in meetings, in classrooms, in family gatherings where your voice got talked over so many times you eventually stopped trying. The world moves fast and loud, and somewhere along the way you started believing that if you're not constantly performing, promoting, proving yourself, then you must not be valuable. You felt the sting of watching less capable people get promoted, get praised, get recognized simply because they knew how to sell themselves while you were busy actually doing the work. And the worst part isn't even the external dismissal, it's the internal war that starts when you begin to question your own worth. You start wondering if there's something fundamentally wrong with you, if you're broken in some way that everyone else can see but you can't fix. Why don't I speak up? Why can't I be more like them? Why does it feel like everyone else got a manual on how to exist in this world and you're just making it up as you go? You've tried to change, tried to be louder, tried to demand attention, but it felt like wearing someone else's skin, like speaking someone else's language. And the exhaustion of pretending to be something you're not became heavier than the pain of being overlooked. So you retreated further into yourself, convinced that maybe this is just who you are. The background character, the supporting role, the one who watches everyone else live the life you thought you'd have. There comes a moment when the weight of invisibility becomes unbearable, when you realize you've spent years, maybe decades, shrinking yourself to make other people comfortable, staying quiet to keep the peace, holding back your truth because you didn't want to upset the balance. You've swallowed your voice so many times it started to dissolve, and now when you try to speak, nothing comes out but doubt and hesitation. The rejection isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's just the absence of acknowledgement, the way people's eyes glaze over when you talk, the way conversations continue as if you never contributed anything at all. You felt the sting of being forgotten, left out, overlooked for things you were more than qualified for simply because you didn't play the game, didn't network loudly enough, didn't perform your competence like a circus act. And underneath all of it is this gnawing fear that maybe you've wasted too much time being quiet, that maybe if you had spoken up sooner, demanded more, fought harder, your life would look completely different right now. But what if everything you've been told about your silence is a lie? What if the very thing they've used to dismiss you is actually the source of your greatest power? Look at nature, and you'll see the truth written everywhere. Storms announce themselves with lightning and thunder. They scream their arrival so everyone knows they're coming. But earthquakes move in complete silence and reshape entire landscapes before anyone even realizes what's happening. Volcanoes rumble and smoke for everyone to see, but tectonic plates shift beneath the surface for decades, building pressure that will one day change the face of the earth. The lion doesn't roar before the hunted watches, calculates, conserves its energy, and when it finally moves, the prey doesn't even see it coming. Your silence was never weakness, it was observation, preparation, the gathering of strength that doesn't need an audience to validate it. While everyone else was performing their power, you were actually building yours. Think about the trees that survive the hurricanes while others fall. It's not the ones that grew fast and tall and visible that make it through the storm. It's the ones that spent years growing roots deep underground where no one could see them. While other trees were racing toward the sky, desperate to be noticed, to reach the sunlight first, to prove they were the tallest, the strongest trees were doing invisible work in the darkness. They were pushing through rock, wrapping around obstacles, creating a foundation so strong that when the winds came, they didn't even sway. You've been growing roots while everyone else has been growing branches, and the day is coming when the storm will reveal who was actually prepared and who was just tall. Depth always outlasts height. Substance always outlasts spectacle. And the work you do in silence will always be more powerful than the noise others make for attention. There's a reason a blade is sharpened in darkness, away from eyes and opinions and the pressure to perform before it's ready. The craftsman doesn't sharpen a sword on a stage, doesn't invite an audience to watch every stroke, every adjustment, every moment of refinement. He works in solitude because that's where precision happens, where true sharpness is created, where a weapon transforms from raw metal into something that can cut through anything. Your seasons of isolation weren't rejection, they were preparation. Every moment you spent alone, processing, thinking, learning, growing, you were being sharpened for something specific. The manufacturer doesn't build every tool the same way because not every tool has the same purpose. Some are designed for spectacle, to be displayed, to look impressive on a wall. But others are designed for impact, for precision, for the kind of work that changes everything when the moment demands it. You weren't built to be decoration, you were built to be dangerous. And here's what the loud ones will never understand. Water doesn't announce itself, doesn't make threats, doesn't demand to be feared, but given enough time, it carves through solid stone. Drop by drop, wave after wave, silent and persistent and absolutely unstoppable. They can ignore you, dismiss you, underestimate you all they want, but every day you're moving forward, learning, adapting, becoming sharper, and they won't even notice until suddenly everything has changed and you're standing where they thought they'd always be. The most powerful movements in history didn't start with crowds and cameras. They started with quiet people in quiet rooms making quiet decisions that would eventually shake the world. Rosa Parks wasn't loud, she just refused to move. Gandhi didn't scream, he just stopped cooperating. The revolution doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stops playing the game and the whole system realizes it can't function without the ones it took for granted. Your silence has been your strategy, whether you knew it or not. While others were broadcasting their every move, telegraphing their intentions, showing their cards to anyone who would watch, you were learning to move without being tracked. You were developing the ability to think without speaking, to plan without announcing, to build without permission. They think they know you because you're quiet, but the truth is they don't know anything because you've never given them access to your real thoughts, your real plans, your real capacity. You've been underestimated so long you've learned to use it as camouflage. And now you move through spaces where they don't even register you as a threat until it's too late to stop what you've already set in motion. The danger of the quiet ones isn't aggression or violence, it's competence meeting opportunity, it's preparation meeting moment. It's someone who has been sharpening their skills in private, suddenly stepping into the light with a level of mastery no one saw coming. Stop measuring yourself by their metrics. Stop judging your worth by whether they notice you, applaud you, validate you. A lion doesn't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep, and you don't need the approval of people who confuse your quietness for weakness. They're not your audience, they're not your measuring stick, and their blindness to your value says everything about their vision and nothing about your worth. You've been waiting for permission that you never needed, seeking approval from people who were never qualified to grant it, trying to prove yourself in arenas that were never meant for you in the first place. But there's a difference between being overlooked and being undercover, between being dismissed and being disguised, between losing and strategically retreating to higher ground. You haven't been losing, you've been loading. And everything they mistook for silence was actually the sound of rounds being chambered. Let me tell you about a blade that changed history. There was a craftsman who spent 18 months in a workshop with no windows, no visitors, no distractions. People forgot about him. They assumed he'd given up, failed, disappeared into irrelevance. But every single day he was heating metal, folding it, hammering it, cooling it, heating it again. The same process hundreds of times while the world outside moved on without him. Other smiths were taking orders, making quick sales, building reputations with decent work that people could use right away. But this craftsman wasn't making a decent blade, he was making a legendary one. When he finally emerged, people laughed at first because they'd forgotten who he was. But then a warrior picked up that blade and it cut through armor that had never been penetrated, through shields that had never been broken, through every defense that everyone thought was impenetrable. The blade didn't announce itself. It just performed when the moment demanded it. And suddenly everyone wanted to know where it came from, who made it, how it was possible. The craftsman smiled because he knew something they didn't. Greatness isn't made in public, it's forged in isolation. And the longer you spend in the fire, the sharper you emerge. You've been in the fire. You've been in that workshop with no windows while everyone else was out there building their brands, networking, climbing ladders, making noise. And maybe you looked around and thought you were wasting time, falling behind, missing opportunities. But what if you weren't falling behind? What if you were going deep? What if every moment of isolation was adding another layer of strength they'll never have because they were too busy performing to actually prepare? The blade doesn't get sharp in the display case, it gets sharp in the darkness where the real work happens. You've been doing real work while they've been doing real estate in other people's attention. And when your moment comes, when you're finally called to perform, to deliver, to show what you're actually made of, they're going to realize they brought decoration to a battlefield and you brought a weapon. There's a chess master who sits at tournaments and doesn't move for 20 minutes. While opponents fidget, check the clock, try to read his face for any hint of strategy. They mistake his stillness for confusion, his silence for weakness. They think he's stuck, lost, overwhelmed by their opening moves. So they get comfortable, they lean back, they start thinking about their victory speech. And then he moves once, then twice, then 3 times. And suddenly it's checkmate. And they're staring at the board trying to figure out what just happened. The thinking didn't happen when he moved, it happened in the silence. Every possibility mapped, every counter move calculated, every trap identified and avoided. He won the game in his mind 20 minutes before his hand ever touched a piece. That's the power of the quiet ones. They're not reacting, they're responding. They're not guessing, they're knowing. They're not playing, they're executing a strategy you didn't even know existed. You've been in that chair, sitting still while the world moved around you, and everyone assumed you had nothing to contribute. But you weren't stuck, you were studying. You weren't lost, you were learning. You weren't weak, you were waiting for the right moment because you understand something they don't. Timing matters more than speed. Precision matters more than power. And one calculated move will always beat 1,000 frantic ones. They've been playing checkers while you've been playing chess. And the beautiful thing about chess is that the quiet pieces, the ones that sit in the background for most of the game, are often the ones that deliver checkmate. The queen gets all the attention, but sometimes it's the pawn that's been quietly advancing, unnoticed and underestimated, that ends the game. Before I continue, answer one question honestly. How many times have you been underestimated, and how many times did you later prove them wrong without saying a word? Think about it. Every teacher who overlooked you, every boss who passed you over, every person who dismissed you as insignificant, how many of them eventually had to watch you succeed in spite of their blindness? How many times have you quietly outgrown the spaces that tried to keep you small? If you're still listening, something inside you is waking up. Something that's been dormant, something that's been waiting, something that remembers who you actually are beneath all the doubt and dismissal. That feeling in your chest right now, that's not just emotion, that's recognition. You're starting to see that your silence was never the problem, their deafness was. Now let me tell you about a seed. You plant it in soil and cover it with dirt, and from the outside it looks like nothing is happening. Days pass, weeks pass. You could walk over that spot 1,000 times and never know there's anything beneath your feet. But underground, in complete darkness, that seed is breaking open. It's pushing through its own shell, fighting through packed soil, navigating around rocks, reaching for a surface it can't even see yet. Everything about the process is violent and invisible and absolutely necessary. The seed doesn't announce its progress, doesn't ask for applause for every inch of growth, doesn't stop to prove it's working. It just works. And then one day, when no one's paying attention, a shoot breaks through the surface, then a stem, then leaves. And within a season, that invisible struggle becomes a tree that will outlive everyone who walked over it without knowing it was there. You've been underground. You've been in the dark doing invisible work while people walked over your life like you didn't exist, like nothing important was happening, like you were just taking up space. But breaking through your own limitations, pushing through the weight of other people's expectations, navigating around the obstacles they put in your path, that's not nothing. That's everything. And the fact that they couldn't see it doesn't mean it wasn't happening. You've been becoming something in the darkness. And the version of you that's about to break through the surface is going to shock everyone who thought you were finished before you started. Trees don't apologize for taking years to grow. They don't shrink themselves because someone expected faster results. They just keep pushing up until suddenly they're undeniable, unmovable, impossible to ignore. That's your next chapter. There's one more story you need to hear. There was a person who spent years feeling invisible, irrelevant, like they were living someone else's life in someone else's skin. They showed up every day to jobs that didn't fulfill them, relationships that didn't see them, spaces that didn't value them. And they kept thinking that something was wrong with them because everyone else seemed so sure, so confident, so clear about their path. But this person was just quiet, observing, processing, learning what they didn't want by experiencing it, learning who they weren't by trying to be someone else. And then one day, without fanfare or announcement, clarity hit. Not like lightning, but like sunrise, slow and inevitable and undeniable. They realized that all those years of silence weren't wasted, they were necessary. They had to become fluent in what wasn't right so they could recognize what was. They had to learn everyone else's language so they could discover their own. And when they finally stepped into their truth, into their purpose, into the life they were actually designed for, it wasn't loud or dramatic, it was just right. And that rightness was so powerful, it didn't need explanation or justification or anyone's approval. The quiet ones don't make noise when they find their path. They just start walking it, and the earth shifts beneath their feet. You observe in silence. You learn in silence. You sharpen in silence. You heal in silence. You grow in silence. And every single moment that you spend in that silence, you're becoming something they can't predict, can't control, can't categorize into the boxes they've prepared for people like you. They need you to be loud, because loud is manageable. Loud is trackable. Loud tells them exactly where you are and what you're planning and how threatened they should feel. But your silence terrifies them because they can't read it, can't decode it, can't figure out if you're defeated or just patient. If you've given up or if you're gathering strength for something they're not prepared for. And the truth is, you don't owe them clarity. You don't owe them a roadmap to your interior world. You don't owe them explanations for why you move the way you move, think the way you think, operate in frequencies they can't even hear. Stop announcing your plans to people who don't have the capacity to understand them. Stop defending your process to people who've never built anything that mattered. Stop seeking validation from people who are threatened by your potential, because deep down they know that when you finally step into your power, their mediocrity becomes obvious. You don't need their permission, their approval, their understanding, or their applause. What you need is to trust that the quiet work you've been doing in the dark is real work, valuable work, necessary work. What you need is to stop measuring your progress against people who started running before they knew where they were going. Speed without direction is just chaos with momentum. And you've spent too much time feeling bad about being slow when actually you were being thorough. Too much time feeling bad about being quiet when actually you were being intentional. Too much time feeling bad about being unseen when actually you were being underestimated. And underestimation is the greatest advantage you could possibly have. Let them think you're harmless. Let them think you're passive. Let them think you've accepted your place in the background, that you're comfortable being overlooked, that you've made peace with being invisible. Let them get so comfortable in their assumptions about you that they stop paying attention altogether. Because that's when you move. Not with announcement or drama or the need to prove anything to anyone, but with precision, with purpose, with the kind of quiet competence that doesn't need to explain itself because the results do all the talking. The most dangerous people in any room are the ones no one's watching. The ones who've been underestimated so consistently they've learned to weaponize it. The ones who let everyone else fight for attention while they position themselves exactly where they need to be for the moment that matters. You've been in training and didn't even know it. Every time you were overlooked, you learned to move without being noticed. Every time you were underestimated, you learned to exceed expectations without warning. Every time you were dismissed, you learned that other people's perception has nothing to do with your reality. You've been developing skills they don't teach in schools, building muscles they don't have names for, cultivating a kind of internal strength that doesn't need external validation to know it's real. While they were collecting likes and followers and surface-level affirmations, you were collecting wisdom, experience, depth, the kind of substance that can't be performed or faked or purchased with charisma. And substance always outlasts style. Always. Every single time. Think about what you've survived that no one knows about. The battles you fought in your mind at 3 a.m, the moments you almost quit but didn't. The days you showed up even though everything in you wanted to disappear. The times you rebuilt yourself from nothing with no audience, no support, no one cheering you on or telling you it would be worth it. You did that in silence. You survived in silence. You grew in silence. And if you could do all of that with no validation, no recognition, no proof that it mattered, imagine what you're capable of now that you're starting to understand your own power. Imagine what happens when all that quiet strength finally has a direction, a purpose, a target. They're not ready. They think they've seen you, but they've only seen the version of you that was still figuring things out. They haven't met the version that knows. You are not weak, you are calculated. You are not invisible, you are unreadable. You are not defeated, you are patient. You are not lost, you are selective. You are not behind, you are positioned. And there is a massive difference between being overlooked and being undercover, between being dismissed and being disguised, between retreating and strategically choosing your battles. You haven't been losing, you've been learning. You haven't been failing, you've been filtering. You haven't been stuck, you've been storing energy for the moment when it actually matters. And that moment is coming faster than you think. The lion doesn't announce the hunt. It watches the herd, identifies the target, calculates the distance, considers the wind, and when every variable is accounted for, it moves. And by the time the prey realizes what's happening, it's already over. That's not cruelty, that's nature. That's efficiency. That's the difference between reacting and responding, between making noise and making impact. You don't need to roar to be dangerous. You don't need to perform your power for people who wouldn't recognize it anyway. You just need to know who you are, what you're capable of, and when to strike. And the beautiful thing about being underestimated is that when you finally do move, no one sees it coming. They're looking the wrong direction, expecting the wrong thing, prepared for a version of you that no longer exists. Every person who dismissed you, every opportunity that passed you by, every room that didn't make space for you, they were all doing you a favor they didn't intend to do. They were pushing you out of spaces that were too small for what you're becoming. They were closing doors that would have led you to mediocre destinations. They were forcing you into the wilderness where the real transformation happens, where you shed the need to be liked and learn to be respected, where you stop seeking comfort and start seeking truth. You thought rejection was proof you weren't enough, but it was actually proof that you were too much for those spaces, too deep for shallow rooms, too complex for simple expectations. And instead of shrinking to fit, you've been expanding in private, growing in dimensions they don't have measurements for. Here's what they'll never tell you. The system is designed to reward the loud, because the loud are predictable, manageable, easy to control. If you're constantly broadcasting your every move, your every thought, your every intention, then you're easy to track, easy to manipulate, easy to redirect. But the quiet ones, the ones who think before they speak, who observe before they act, who build in private and deliver in public, those are the ones the system can't control. Those are the ones who move through spaces without leaving fingerprints, who build empires without asking permission, who change games without announcing the new rules. You've been operating outside their algorithms, and they've mistaken your absence from their systems as irrelevance when actually it's immunity. Stop trying to play by rules that were designed to keep you small. Stop competing in games where the scoring system is rigged against depth, substance, thoughtfulness, everything you actually are. Stop measuring your worth by metrics that were created by people who profit from your insecurity. Your value isn't determined by how many people see you, it's determined by the quality of what you build when no one's watching. Your power isn't measured by volume, it's measured by impact. And impact doesn't need an audience, it just needs authenticity, consistency, and the courage to keep building even when no one's applauding. You know what's coming, don't you? You can feel it, that shift in the atmosphere, that sense that something is about to break open, that the season is changing, and this time it's changing in your favor. You've been in winter so long you forgot what spring feels like, but it's coming. Not because you wished for it, not because you deserved a break, but because you've been doing the work that winter requires. You've been resting when rest was needed, reflecting when reflection was necessary, composing yourself in the cold so that when warmth returns, you're not scattered, you're focused. Trees don't bloom in winter because winter isn't for blooming, it's for rooting. And your roots are so deep now that when your season comes, nothing will be able to shake what you become. And when you finally move, when you finally step out of the shadows and into your purpose, into your calling, into the life you were designed for, the world won't know what hit them. Not because you destroyed anything, not because you forced anything, but because you built something undeniable while they were busy being distracted. You built competence while they built brands. You built character while they built personas. You built substance while they built audiences. And substance doesn't need announcement, it just needs presentation. The moment you present what you've been building, everything changes. Not for them, for you. Because you'll finally see that the quiet years weren't wasted, they were necessary. You'll finally understand that the silence wasn't punishment, it was preparation. You'll finally realize that being underestimated wasn't a curse, it was camouflage. The most dangerous predator is the one no one sees coming. The most powerful force is the one that moves without warning. The most transformative moments in history happened when quiet people made quiet decisions that had loud consequences. And you're next. Not because you're special in the way they define special, but because you're awake in a world that's still sleeping, because you're building while they're performing, because you've learned the difference between being seen and being valuable, and you've chosen valuable even when it cost you visibility. That choice is about to pay dividends you can't even imagine yet. Stop explaining yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you. Stop shrinking to make loud people comfortable. Stop apologizing for taking up space, for having thoughts, for moving differently than everyone expected you to move. Your quietness isn't a flaw that needs fixing. It's a feature that needs protecting. In a world that's drowning in noise, your silence is revolutionary. In a culture that's addicted to performance, your authenticity is radical. In a society that measures worth by attention, your depth is priceless. Don't let them convince you to trade what makes you dangerous for what makes you acceptable. Acceptable people blend in. Dangerous people change everything. Your time in the shadows wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Every moment you spent alone, processing, healing, growing, learning, you were being forged into something specific. The manufacturer doesn't make every tool the same because not every task requires the same approach. Some jobs need hammers, loud and obvious and impossible to miss. But some jobs need scalpels, precise and quiet and absolutely deadly in the right hands. You weren't built to be decoration, you were built to be functional. You weren't designed to look impressive on a wall. You were designed to cut through problems that everyone else declared unsolvable. And the only reason they declared them unsolvable is because they didn't have access to what you're carrying. When you finally move, and you will move, don't announce it, don't warn them, don't give them time to prepare, to adjust, to figure out how to minimize your impact. Just move. Execute the plan you've been building in private. Deliver the work you've been perfecting in silence. Step into the room you've been preparing for without asking if there's space for you. There's always space for excellence. There's always room for substance. There's always a seat at the table for someone who brings value instead of just demanding attention. And when they ask where you came from, when they wonder how they missed you, when they try to figure out how you got so good without anyone noticing, smile. Because you'll know something they don't. The best work has always happened in the dark. The quiet ones don't need to roar to be heard. They don't need to perform to be respected. They don't need validation to be valuable. They just move and the ground shakes. They just speak and the room goes silent. They just deliver and the game changes. Not because they announced their greatness, but because their work spoke for itself. Not because they demanded attention, but because their results commanded respect. Not because they were loud, but because they were undeniable. And undeniable doesn't need introduction, doesn't need explanation, doesn't need anyone's approval. It just is. This is your moment. Not to become someone new, but to reveal who you've been becoming all along. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to present what you've been building in private. Not to fight for space, but to occupy the territory you've already claimed in the invisible realm. Your silence was never surrender, it was strategy. Your quietness was never weakness, it was wisdom. Your invisibility was never irrelevance, it was preparation for a kind of visibility you couldn't have handled before now. But you're ready now. Everything you've survived, everything you've learned, everything you've become in the dark has prepared you for what's about to happen in the light. And when it does, don't be surprised when people are shocked, when they ask where you came from, when they wonder how they missed you. Just keep moving, because the quiet ones don't need credit, they just need impact. And you're about to make one they'll never forget. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more messages like this that remind you who you really are, subscribe, because your journey has just begun. The truth is, you've been dangerous all along. You just didn't know it because they convinced you that silence was the same as absence, that quietness meant you had nothing to offer, that being overlooked was proof of your insignificance. But every moment you spent in the background, you were watching, learning, understanding how the game works, who the players really are, what the stakes actually mean. While they were performing for an audience, you were studying the performance, dissecting it, recognizing the patterns, the manipulation, the emptiness behind all that noise. And now you see what they'll never see. That volume and value are not the same thing, that attention and achievement are not equal, that being seen and being significant exist in completely different dimensions. You're not the same person you were when this journey started. The you that needed their approval is gone. The you that measured worth by their validation has evolved. The you that shrunk to fit into spaces too small for your spirit has outgrown those rooms entirely. Something has shifted in you, something that can't be reversed or undone or talked out of. You've tasted what it feels like to build something real in the silence, to create something valuable without needing applause, to know your own strength without requiring anyone else to confirm it. And once you taste that kind of self-knowledge, that kind of internal certainty, you can never go back to seeking permission from people who were never qualified to grant it. The world needs the quiet ones more than it knows. It needs people who think before they react, who observe before they judge, who build before they announce. It needs people who aren't addicted to attention, who don't need constant affirmation, who can sit in uncertainty without panicking, who can move through opposition without collapsing. The loud ones can start movements, but the quiet ones sustain them. The performers can gather crowds, but the builders create foundations. The noisemakers can win attention, but the substance carriers change lives. And you're a substance carrier. You always have been. You just got confused for a while, thinking that because they couldn't see your value, it must not exist. But their blindness was never about your worth. It was always about their vision. So what happens now? You stop waiting. You stop preparing to prepare. You stop rehearsing for a moment that's already here. Everything you need to move forward, you already have. Every skill you need to succeed, you've already developed. Every lesson you needed to learn, you've already survived. The only thing standing between you and the life you're supposed to be living is the decision to stop letting their definitions determine your direction. You don't need their stage. You don't need their spotlight. You don't need their microphone. You just need to trust that what you built in the dark is strong enough to stand in the light. And when you do step forward, when you finally present what you've been building, some people will celebrate you and some people will be threatened by you. And both reactions will tell you everything you need to know. The ones who celebrate were never intimidated by your potential. They were waiting for you to see it yourself. The ones who feel threatened were always aware of what you could become. That's why they tried so hard to keep you small. But neither group gets to determine what you do next. That power belongs to you now. You've earned it through every moment you didn't quit. Every night you rebuilt yourself. Every time you chose growth over comfort, substance over spectacle, truth over approval. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous because they're patient enough to wait for their moment, wise enough to recognize it when it comes, and prepared enough to seize it when it arrives. They don't need permission. They don't need validation. They don't need anyone to believe in them because they've learned to believe in themselves. And that self-belief, that quiet confidence, that internal knowing that no external voice can shake, that's the most dangerous weapon anyone can carry. Because you can't negotiate with it, can't diminish it, can't talk someone out of something they've proven to themselves in private. Your silence was never the problem. Their deafness was. Your stillness was never weakness. Their chaos was. Your patience was never passivity. Their impatience was. And now you know the difference. Now you see clearly. Now you understand that you were never behind. You were just moving at the speed of mastery while everyone else was moving at the speed of ego. And mastery always wins. Maybe not immediately, maybe not loudly, maybe not in ways that make headlines, but it wins. It always wins. Because substance outlasts spectacle, depth outlasts performance, and truth outlasts trends. You are not who they said you were. You are who you became when no one was watching. You are what you built when no one believed. You are the strength you found when everything tried to break you. And that version of you, the one forged in silence and shaped by struggle and refined by rejection, that's the most dangerous thing they'll ever encounter. Not because you want to harm anyone, but because you're finally done shrinking. And when quiet people stop shrinking, when they finally take up the space they were always meant to occupy, the world has no choice but to make room.